Hello and welcome back to Slaggy Book Club, the book club that is everything but a book club. And I think I might change that tagline, so be prepared for some switcheroos coming up with the branding. We're still figuring stuff out. It's just me. I'm Cameron, and today's episode is my April reading wrap up, and I'm not gonna say it. Can you believe it's May? We are already more than 4 months into 2025. The time is flying. I'm about to tell you all of the books that I read in April. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a portion. And I feel like it was quite an all right month. I can't say it was a banger of a month. I can't say that, every book slayed the house boots down. But there were some good reads. And I do have some recommendations for y'all, and I do have some, hey, maybe give that one a misses for y'all. Some books I was really highly anticipating and very, very excited for that may or may not have let me down. So a little bit of tea to discuss, and we're gonna jump right into it. But before we do, guys, is anybody else following along on the Recipe Tin Eats Bake with Brookie drama? It is so juicy. It dropped while I was at work in the bookstore, which was really fun because I picked up my phone, opened Instagram, and was like, Recipe Tin Eats drama! And all my colleagues and everyone in the store was like, and we all just started gasping, and I got to announce what the goss was, and it was a really fun moment. So I remember exactly what I was when the news dropped. For anyone who has somehow missed it, Recipe Tin Eats Nagi Maihashi has accused Brooke Bellamy of plagiarizing a couple of her recipes, namely her caramel slice and her baklava recipes. Now, as someone who's not a baker nor chef, not sure how different a caramel slice / baklava recipe can really be, but when you see them side by side, Nagi posted the two recipes side by side, it really was just a little bit of copy paste and change a couple words here and there. You can see the similarities. And actually, since Nagi came out with her allegations, other chefs have come out and been like, yeah, I kind of noticed that recipe in Brookie's book looked quite similar to mine as well. Brookie has, of course, denied the allegations and continues to, despite offering to remove the two recipes from future publications of her cookbook. She's also since been dropped as an ambassador for a girls' entrepreneurship program, which is a bit yikes. But hey, another exciting day in the publishing industry. Let's jump into my April reading wrap up. And the first book that I picked up in the month of April was a book that I was so damn excited for, so incredibly excited for. I was so lucky to get, actually, I didn't even get sent an advance copy. My bookstore did, and I snatched it because nobody else cares about Hilde Hinton's books except me. I am a diehard fan of Hilde herself. She's an incredible person, but also her first two novels were really beautiful, really moving stories that I was very impressed by and affected me emotionally, and I loved them. I adored them. I adore her characters. I adore her storytelling. And so I was very excited for the opposite of Lonely, her third book. I'm not gonna lie, guys, this let me down. This was not Hilda's strongest work, if you ask me. Okay? I found that her previous works have had very strong themes of resilience and hope, right? And they really inspire empathy. And so that's what I was expecting to emerge as I was reading this story. The narrative was very different to the previous stories, where her previous two books were about sort of underdog characters who were a little hard done by in whatever way. They hadn't had easy lives, and they found sort of hope and strength and joy or happiness or community or whatever through the story, and They don't necessarily have happy endings, but they have sort of realistic, wholesome, understandable endings that make sense for the tone of the story kind of thing, right? This was almost like in reverse in terms of the character's journey. And I need to try to talk about this without spoiling it because you guys don't want spoilers, but I'm also like telling you not to read it. And honestly, I know you guys aren't going to because this is like not many people do read Hilde Hinton. I've come to learn, but I won't spoil it. I'll just say that it took a very different path, a different journey than Hilde's previous works. It sort of goes downhill rather than uphill for our protagonist. And that was really disappointing because it was sort of like, what was the point here? Like what I didn't know what point Hilde was trying to make. I feel like she had a concept and didn't quite figure out the resolution, but it's okay. I forgive her. It's fine. I still adore Hilde with all of my heart. I think she's an incredible woman and I will read her next book. I don't care. It's fine. No hard feelings. We'll just forget that this one ever happened. I then read The Wall by Marlen Haushofer, and aside from the fact that this has no chapters, not one single paragraph break, it was an interesting read. I did feel very claustrophobic. I felt very trapped within the book, but I suppose that's quite an immersive experience because this follows a protagonist who wakes up one morning at her friend's little house out in the country that she's gone to stay at. They went out for dinner the night before. She decided to stay in. They haven't returned. And she's like, odd. So she wanders down to town to see if she can find them, and she bumps into an invisible wall and discovers that she is now trapped within an invisible wall, and everything on the other side of that wall seems dead. So then she has to navigate this new reality, essentially. There's only so much you can do with that plot, right? And I picked this up. I'd heard about this because it is recommended sort of in relation to I Who Have Never Known Men. It's very much like if you enjoyed I Who Have Never Known Men, then you should pick up this one. Similar themes, similar vibe. And I do get that, and that makes sense. And it's similar themes, similar vibe. It didn't quite hit the same as I Who Have Never Known Men, which obviously is difficult, but I don't think that it was as thought-provoking or philosophical, but it was still sort of fascinating to, I think the protagonist is uniquely fascinating, and her thought processes don't feel relatable. I'm like, I personally probably wouldn't make that choice, but all right, interesting. It was sort of fascinating watching her figure out how to navigate this new life. I will say that the ending, not what I wanted. You took me on this whole journey of really, really not much. Right? We're not working with a lot. Not much is really happening here. We do have questions, namely, what the fuck? No chapters. I just had to endure, and then that's how it ends? There's just this one particular thing that happens right towards the end, and you're like, huh? And then you get no answers, which I suppose is very I Who Have Never Known Men, but it didn't leave me feeling the same. It just left me feeling a little bit angry because why did you do that? I'm getting heated. I'm getting physically heated by this sun as well. Just 1 second, please. Right, goodness gracious, I'm back and no longer sweating. This is a very frustrating book. It's a very frustrating book. It's a very claustrophobic book. It's quite anxiety-inducing, and it wore my patience a little thin. Despite all of that, I don't regret reading it, and I didn't not enjoy it. Do I recommend it? Perhaps. It's a strange book to recommend. I do, again, understand why people recommend it for people who have liked I Who Have Never Known Men. I'm not confident in saying that if you liked I Who Have Never Known Men, you will like this. Very different experience. Leaves you feeling quite different. But hey, if you're curious, why not give it a go? Just beware that there are no chapters and it goes on and on and on and on. And speaking of Jacqueline Harpman, I did read her other novel translated to English, Orlanda. I finally got my hands on it and I finally picked it up after leaving it on my shelf in my house for a few months. I literally tried for over a year to purchase this, and then I finally purchased it and was like, cool, I'll read that eventually. It was fun. It was a fun time. Jacqueline, she do be psychoanalyzing. She was a psychoanalyst in her life. That was her job for a while before she started authoring. And you really see that shines through in her writing. There were definitely bits in this that were a little bit, let's say, problematic by today's standards. But I think we've learned a lot in the last 5 to 10 years about the trans experience, and what language we should and shouldn't use when talking about things like gender dysphoria, right? This was written in the 90s, I believe. I think that there's things that can be forgiven and put down to the time, but there are some things that are yikes. Despite that, though, there were some elements that were fascinatingly realistic, let me say, because while I was reading this, during the same sort of week that I was reading this, I was also listening to the audiobook of Elliot Page's Pageboy, which is another sort of gender trans themed story, right? Obviously a memoir, not a fiction. And therein lies what was so fascinating about consuming these two stories at the same time, because I found myself, I'd pick up this after having listened, I'd go for a drive in the morning listening to Pageboy, and then that afternoon I'd pick this up and I would sort of be reading, thinking back to the previous parts of this book and relating the story as you do, whatever. And then I'd realize that actually, no, I was thinking about something that Elliot was saying in his book. And I was getting muddled because there were so many parallels in the experiences of the character in this book and Elliot Page, specifically when they're talking about their childhoods. Our protagonist in this story, essentially, okay, let me tell you what this story is so that you can understand what I'm talking about. This is a play on Orlanda by Virginia Woolf, which is a story about someone who jumps into the body of someone of a different gender and kind of lives out their life like that. Something about that. I don't know. I haven't read it. It sounds cool though, and I think I will read it. This is essentially that. Our protagonist, what's her name? Aline. She is reading Orlando and she's like, that'd be cool. I wish I could do that. And then she does it. And she jumps into the body of this dude who's sat over there at the train station. And her psyche, her consciousness, splits into, and female body Aline still exists and carries on, but then the other part of her psyche that has jumped into this man has now taken over his body and starts to live life as him. And Aline's character, or the part of Aline that has jumped into this man, right, who had the desire to jump into a man's body, starts talking about in their childhood how they sort of related more to being a boy, or hanging out with the boys, playing with the boys, and their parents were always you need to wear dresses and be a girl and all these kinds of things, right? And this was exactly what Elliot was talking about in his experience being a trans child, right? And just the sort of thought processes and the not kind of understanding why do I have to why is everyone telling me to be a girl? That just doesn't feel right. And all the kind of minutiae of the psychology of it was totally aligned, which is really fascinating when you think about one, Pageboy is literally a trans man talking about his experience growing up, coming of age, being a trans person, right? And this is a cis woman writing a fiction story, imagining what it might be like to be not categorically a trans person, but to be somebody who doesn't fully identify with their ascribed gender and is feeling what we would now label as a sense of dysphoria. So fascinating. It was such a niche experience to happen to consume these stories side by side. If you haven't read Pageboy, I highly recommend doing a little tandem situation and consuming these two stories at the same time, because I feel like it just enriched this and brought this Orlanda to life in a way that I maybe wouldn't have appreciated had I not sort of been able to marvel at Jacqueline's accuracy. By no means a match for I Who Have Never Known Men, of course, but a different type of story, a different experience, and still absolutely well worth the read. And while my pursuit of this has been quite difficult because it has not been actively in print and it has been a little bit difficult to get my hands on, the good news is that Penguin are reprinting Orlanda. It makes sense. I've been imagining that this was going to happen since the absolute blow up of I Who Have Never Known Men. It only makes sense for a publishing house to then capitalize on Jacqueline's other work. This is the only other novel by her, but that has been translated to English. So if I were a publishing house, I would. Pop that one on your lists, guys. The new cover, in my opinion, is a lot nicer as well. It kind of matches the I Who Have Never Known Men cover. So get excited, wait for July, and then grab your copy of Orlanda because it's definitely worth the read. And try, if you can, to listen in tandem with Pageboy, which I also highly recommend on its own. I was absolutely engrossed in Elliot's story. Not only is he like a very gifted storyteller, I obviously listened and didn't read the words on the page, but I think he's a very gifted writer, which is always like a nice pleasant surprise when you're reading a celebrity memoir, right? It's like this person isn't necessarily a writer, so to pick up a story you're interested in, someone's life you're interested in, and for it to actually be written well and be compelling is such a, surprise and delight kind of experience. But his story, I think, is a uniquely fascinating one just because of how much his transition was in the public eye and how much of his life before he transitioned was in the public eye. Like, we got to know him before his transition, right? And so we all kind of witnessed this shift, and our idea of who he was shifted. And I think that Elliot's career was so big and everybody knew him that, yeah, we have like a vested interest in his past in a way. And yeah, this really felt like essential reading. Like, I learned so much about the trans experience, about dysphoria. It was harrowing reading about how sort of disgusted at times he felt living in his body. The specific experience of feeling that way, but also in the public eye, like, I can't imagine. It was so fascinating. And, there's also like a little bit of Hollywood gossip thrown in there, of course, to keep things juicy and a little bit funsies. But yeah, super important read. I'm so glad that I finally picked it up. It's been on my list for so long, and then I saw the audiobook was available, and I love the idea of hearing him tell his own story with his own voice. And I get it. I get why people talk about reading/listening to memoirs narrated by the author themselves, because yeah, it was a very powerful experience. So highly recommend that one as well. Hey, have you hit subscribe? Follow? What about that bell that tells you when I post? If you haven't, you might be missing my bonus episodes. Hitting the buttons is the best way to show your support for Slaggy Book Club. The second best is just to be here. So thank you. Let's get back to it. Just to get it out of the way, I'm still chipping away at Processed by Lucie Morris-Marr, how the processed meat industry is killing us with the food we love. It is interesting but dry, as you can imagine. I'm not sure there's enough to have made a whole book about this. I feel like she's fluffing it out. I don't think that this could have been an email kind of vibes. So I'm gonna learn what I want to learn eventually. I just have to get through the fluff, unfortunately. But it is interesting learning about, the fact that processed meat has literally been categorized as a carcinogen by the World Health Organization, for example. I remember over 10 years, like when I was a small teenage child, that on the news it was suddenly like, salami gives you cancer. And we were like, whoa, okay, sure. Like, everything gives you cancer these days. Like, my God, that was kind of the reception. And now, like, reading this, it's like, oh, oh, that's like for real. Like, it's literally a carcinogen. And like learning the science behind why. Like, they actually could make bacon, salami, whatever, for example, that is relatively shelf stable and completely edible and tastes pretty much the same and is not carcinogenic. And I think like I can feel myself sort of, when I consider getting a processed meat to eat, there is a voice in my head now that's like, probably shouldn't. Mind you, 2 nights ago I ordered a pepperoni pizza for dinner. But I think I'm like, in moderation. Hopefully by the time I finish this book, I'll be completely turned off of it. I do think that like the rising rates of bowel cancer among young people is heinously concerning and is not being discussed enough. And so I do want to like take my precautions. So I'm not going to stop reading this. I think it's important for me. I think it's going to be helpful. I want to learn these things. It's just like a tedious way of me absorbing the information. I then picked up this book that is so random, so random. Just arrived on my doorstep and I was like, what is that? The Rest of You by Maame Blue, I want to say. And my first thoughts about this when I put it on my TBR for April, I think I put it on my April hopefuls list, so tick. But I remember saying, like, I don't think that this cover communicates the vibe of the story. Want to say, first of all, look at the cover, the international cover, the US cover. That's kind of giving the vibe, because it's sort of a magical realism type story, right? It says, on the cusp of 30, Ghanaian Londoner Whitney Appiah was born with a special gift. The massage therapist can physically sense where her client's trauma lies and heal them, but Whitney has no idea that she too is suffering. Anyways, I really liked this story. I loved the dual timeline. So there's 2 timelines, 2 sort of generations, right? One of them is Whitney, the modern day 20-something in London, massage therapist, living her life. And then the other timeline is in the 90s in Ghana, the family and Whitney's parents, etc., aunties, and what sort of leads them to move over to London. And then, of course, the trauma that Whitney has inside of her that she's sort of like blocked. I loved the Ghana timeline. Whitney's modern day timeline, I was less consumed by. I just felt less invested in her story. And I also found myself, because I had read the blurb, and I don't always read the synopsis, the blurb, I was like, so when's that going to happen? That was my one gripe with this book, right? Was that the stuff that I'd read on the back that it told me were going to happen were like not really happening or unfolding. So I don't know, but all that is to say that it did kind of lose me towards the end. And finally, guys, I picked up my own personal book, Slags. So funny that a book has been published by the name of Slags. It's just meant to be. This is by an author called Emma Jane Unsworth, who I had previously never heard about, but apparently is a big deal. And this was really impressive. I really enjoyed it. And what I will say is that it took me a moment to get into it. Contrary to The Rest of You, which I was into and then slowly drifted out of, I had to kind of slowly drift into this. I think to begin with, the writing, the vibe, the humor, the personalities felt a little bit millennial, and I was like, oh, this might just not click for me. Then I started reading the past timeline part for our protagonist, and it is so real, so relatable. Oh my God, I was so into it. And this follows Sarah in 2 timelines. One, she's 15. She is boy obsessed. She loves drinking and smoking and sex, and she's a party girl. And she's also a little bit in love with her teacher. And then now, today timeline, Sarah is 41. Partying's kind of starting to not really hit the same. Everyone else in her life is already over it. And she's like kind of accepting that she has to grow up now, finally. Oh, she's like, no, one last hurrah. And so she grabs her sister, whose birthday it is, and they go on a camper van road trip through Scotland and kind of uncover some dark stuff from their slaggy pasts. What I will say stood out to me historically when I've read stories about siblings, about sisters, blue sisters, for example, I have found that like I wasn't able to really connect with those sibling sister relationships because I am an only child. And so it has almost felt as though there are things that like you if you know, if you get it, you get it. And I have not got it. So I haven't connected with those stories. Guys, I'm editing the video right now and my microphone literally died at that point. So basically, what I was saying was that the way that Emma Jane Unsworth writes this sisterly relationship made me feel like I completely understood it and could almost like relate to it myself, despite not having siblings. So That is absolute props to her writing. Amazing, amazing sisterly relationship there. Loved reading about it. And then the other thing that really stood out to me was the portrayal of the teenage girl, the portrayal of the boy-obsessed Delulu teenage girl. I related so hard. Like, it was so me. I was a One Direction teenager. And yeah, deep, deep Delulu, romanticized everything. It was wild reading this 15-year-old version of the protagonist and just how, like, real she was. So yeah, absolutely loved the book. Fantastic ending, a twist even, that really made the story and added like a whole lot of depth to it. So highly, highly recommend Slags. I think it may have been my favorite read of the month. And because my microphone died, I shall sign off like this as well. Thank you so much for watching. Tell me in the comments what your favorite read of April, I was gonna say of 2024 for some reason. You can tell me what your favorite read of 2024 was as well if you like, but tell me what your favorite read from April was. Let's chat about them, or come into my DMs and tell me about it. Always here to chat books with you guys. I always say it, I don't want to be speaking into the void, speaking into my phone. I want you guys to chat back. I want to have convos. This is a book club after all. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.